You think you know how power works. You think a first-class ticket guarantees you a seat. Think again. When 17-year-old Maya Hayes boarded Flight 882 to Zurich, she didn't care about status. She just wanted to sleep. But Chief Purser Sheila Graves saw something else. She saw a black teenager in an oversized hoodie and assumed she was an easy target, a placeholder she could bully to accommodate a more important passenger. Sheila forced Maya out of her seat and humiliated her in front of the entire cabin. It was the biggest mistake of her life. Because Maya wasn't just any teenager, and the man waiting in the Gulf Stream G700 on the tarmac wasn't just a father. He was a man who could buy the airline, and he was about to block the runway to make sure justice was served. Buckle up. This is going to be a bumpy ride. The air inside the jet bridge at JFK International Airport was stale-smelling of jet fuel and damp carpet, but it was a smell Maya Hayes had grown up with. At 17, she had flown more miles than most pilots. Today, however, she wasn't flying on her father's private jet. The Horizon, a custom-configured Bombardier Global 7500. Today, she was flying commercial. It was a test, or rather, a lesson. Her father, Darius Hayes, the CEO of Hayes Logistics and Aerosystems, a company that quietly owned the leasing rights to half the cargo containers currently sitting in New York Harbor, had insisted. You want to study art in Zurich, Maya. You get there yourself, no entourage, no private crew, just you and the real world. He had compromised, of course. He bought her a first-class ticket on Royal Atlantic Flight 882, a direct service from New York to Zurich. Maya adjusted her noise-cancelling headphones, her playlist blasting lo-fi beats to drown out the chaos of the terminal. She didn't look like a billionaire's daughter. She wore a charcoal grey, fear of God hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, black leggings and a pair of scuffed Air Jordan 1s. Her curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she carried a battered canvas messenger bag that contained a $50,000 sketchbook and a handful of charcoal pencils. She approached the gate agent, a tired-looking man, who scanned her boarding pass without looking up. The machine beeped green. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hayes." "Seat 1A, he mumbled. Maya walked down the jet bridge, feeling the vibration of the massive Boeing 777-300ER idling at the gate. She turned left upon entering the aircraft, heading toward the sanctuary of first class. It was a world of soft cream leather walnut veneer and the clinking of crystal flutes. There were only 8 suites in first class. Seat 1A was the prime spot, isolated, private and spacious. Maya dropped her canvas bag into the overhead bin, settled into the wide leather seat, and immediately pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself small. She just wanted to sleep. It had been a long week of finals at her prep school in Connecticut, and she was exhausted. She closed her eyes, ready to drift off before takeoff. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, nasal. It cut through the ambient noise of the cabin like a serrated knife. Maya opened one eye. Standing over her was the chief purser. Her name tag read Sheila. She was a tall woman, with hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde rigidity and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was holding a tablet computer like a weapon. "Can I help you?" Maya asked, pulling her headphones down around her neck. "I need to see your boarding pass," Sheila said. She didn't say please. Her tone suggested that Maya had wandered in from the tarmac by accident. Maya blinked, confused. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the crumpled thermal paper stub. She handed it over. Sheila snatched it, her manicured nails clicking against the paper. She stared at it, then at her tablet, then back at Maya. Her eyes raked over Maya's hoodie, the scuffed sneakers, the messy hair. Sheila's lip curled slightly, a micro-expression of disgust that Maya had seen 1,000 times before in high-end department stores. "This is seat 1A, Sheila said slowly, as if speaking to a child. "I know," Maya said, her voice calm. "That's what the ticket says." Sheila tapped her tablet aggressively. "And how did you acquire this ticket exactly?" Maya sat up straighter. "My father bought it for me." "Your father?" Sheila repeated, skepticism dripping from the words. She looked around the cabin. The other first-class passengers were settling in. There was an elderly couple in 2A and 2F, sipping champagne. And then there was this man standing in the aisle just behind Sheila. He was a man in his 50s, wearing a bespoke navy suit that screamed Wall Street, a Patek Philippe Nautilus gleaming under the cabin lights. He was tapping his foot impatiently. This was Richard Sterling, a hedge fund manager known for hostile takeovers and an even more hostile temper. He was a diamond-tier frequent flyer, the kind of man who expected the world to part like the Red Sea when he walked through a room. "Is there a problem, Sheila?" Richard asked, his voice booming. "I was promised 1A. My assistant confirmed it this morning. I need the workspace for the merger documents." Sheila's demeanor shifted instantly. She turned to Richard, her face melting into a mask of sycophantic apology. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry for the confusion. There seems to be a system error with the booking allocation." "System error?" Richard scoffed, glancing at Maya. He didn't look at her face, he looked at her shoes. "It looks like you've let just anyone wander in here. Security standards are slipping, I see." Maya felt the heat rising in her cheeks. "There's no error," she said, her voice firming up. "I have a ticket. I'm assigned to this seat." Sheila turned back to Maya, the fake smile gone. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me, sweetie. First class is for full fare paying customers. We often have issues with employee pass riders or upgrade glitches putting people where they don't belong. Now, Mr. Sterling is a priority partner of the airline. He actually needs this suite." "I'm not an employee pass rider," Maya said, her grip tightening on the armrest. "And I don't care who he is. I'm sitting here." Sheila let out a sharp sigh of exasperation. She stood up straight and crossed her arms. "I don't think you understand the situation. I am the chief purser on this flight. I determine the safety and seating arrangements. I am flagging this ticket as fraudulent in my system until we can verify the purchase method. It's highly suspicious." "Suspicious?" Maya laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Because I'm black, or because I'm not wearing a suit? Don't play the race card with me." Sheila snapped, her voice rising loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "This is about economics and airline policy. You are disrupting the boarding process. Now, I have a perfectly good seat for you in Economy Plus. It's an aisle seat. You'll be comfortable there." Richard Sterling stepped forward, invading Maya's personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and entitlement. "Look, kid, take the offer. You're holding up the flight. Some of us have business to do in Zurich that involves more than backpacking and hostels. Move." Maya looked at Richard, then at Sheila. She felt a familiar fire in her gut, the same fire her father had. But she also remembered her father's rule, never lose your cool. When you lose your temper, you lose your leverage. "I'm not moving," Maya said quietly. "Call the gate agent if you want. Check the system. The ticket was purchased with an American Express Centurion card. It's valid." Sheila rolled her eyes. "The gate agents are busy closing the flight. We are 5 minutes from pushback. I don't have time to chase down credit card receipts for a teenager." I am giving you a direct order as a crew member. Vacate this seat immediately, or I will have you removed by airport security as a disruptive passenger. Do you want to spend the night in a cell, or do you want to get to Zurich? The threat hung heavy in the air. Disruptive passenger. In the post-9/11 world, that label was a sentence. It meant the no-fly list. It meant handcuffs. Maya looked at her phone. She had 1 bar of signal left before the doors closed. She opened her messages. She didn't text her friends. She didn't post on TikTok. She opened the contact labeled Dad Emergency. She typed a single message. They are kicking me out of my seat. 1A. Claiming fraud. Flight 882 JFK. She hit send. Well? Sheila demanded, tapping her foot. Maya looked up at Sheila, her eyes dark and unyielding. Fine, Maya said. I'll move. Richard Sterling let out a loud, triumphant laugh. Finally. Excellent work, Sheila. Make sure to get this seat wiped down before I sit. God knows what she's been doing in it. Sheila beamed at him. Of course, Mr. Sterling. Right away. She turned to Maya and pointed a long, bony finger toward the back of the plane. Row 44, seat E. It's a middle seat. Take your bag. Maya stood up. She grabbed her canvas bag. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She walked past Sheila, who was already fussing over Richard's coat. She walked past the business class passengers, who looked at her with a mix of pity and curiosity. She walked all the way past the Economy Plus section. She walked until she hit the back wall of the plane, near the toilets where the air was thinner and the seats were cramped. Row 44, a middle seat between a man eating a pungent tuna sandwich and a woman with a crying infant. Maya sat down. She squeezed her frame into the narrow space. She put her headphones back on, but she didn't play any music. She just watched the clock. 17:45 p.m. The cabin doors were closed. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Anderson from the flight deck. We've been cleared for pushback, and we're number 3 for departure. Flight time to Zurich is 7 hours and 20 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service. Maya felt the plane jolt as the tug began to push them back from the gate. Up in first class, she knew Richard Sterling was sipping the Dom Perignon, 2008, that was meant for her. She knew Sheila was feeling powerful smug in her victory over a helpless teenager. But the phone in Maya's pocket buzzed. A reply. Stay put. I see you. D. Maya looked out the small, scratched window as the plane began to taxi. In the distance across the tarmac near the private hangars where the billionaires and diplomats parked their jets, she saw a glimmer of silver under the floodlights. It was a massive private jet. A Gulfstream G700, the pinnacle of luxury aviation. Its tail number was N1 Hayes. It wasn't parked. Its engines were spooling up, and it was moving fast. The Boeing 737 was heavy with fuel trundling down taxiway Alpha toward runway 31L. Inside the cabin, the fasten seatbelt sign was illuminated, and the flight attendants had taken their jump seats. In seat 1A, Richard Sterling was already reclining the flute of Dom Perignon, balanced precariously on the armrest. He felt like a king. He had ousted an obstacle and reclaimed his throne. Across from him in the galley, Sheila Graves sat in her jump seat, mentally calculating the tip she might get from Sterling if she kept his glass full. Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff. Captain Anderson's voice came over the PA. The engines began to whine, a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. The plane turned the corner facing the long stretch of concrete that would launch them toward Europe. Suddenly the brakes slammed on. It wasn't a gentle stop. It was a violent, lurching halt that threw carry-on bags forward and caused a collective gasp to ripple through the cabin. In first class, Richard's champagne glass tipped over, splashing sticky, expensive, vintage wine all over his bespoke trousers. "What the hell?" Richard barked, grabbing a napkin. Sheila unbuckled immediately, her face pale. "Please remain seated, Mr. Sterling. I'll check with the flight deck." But before she could pick up the interphone, the captain's voice boomed through the cabin again. He sounded different, this time, strained, confused. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation on the taxiway. We've been ordered to hold position immediately by ground control. Please remain seated." Sheila looked out the porthole window of the aircraft door. Her eyes widened. Blocking the taxiway directly perpendicular to the nose of their massive commercial airliner was a sleek silver private jet. It was a Gulfstream G700, the kind of machine that moved faster and higher than anything else in the sky. It sat there defiant, its engines idling with a menacing hum. It wasn't just parked, it was a barricade. Behind the Gulfstream, 3 black Cadillac Escalades with flashing amber lights sped across the tarmac, disregarding all standard airport protocols. They screeched to a halt right next to the front landing gear of Flight 882. Up in the cockpit, Captain Anderson was shouting into his headset. "Tower, what is going on?" "We have a visual on a private aircraft obstructing taxiway Alpha." "Is this an emergency?" The voice from JFK Tower was uncharacteristically shaky. "Flight 882, hold your position. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to bypass. The aircraft blocking you is registered to—" "Wait. I have a priority override on the line." There was a crackle of static, and then a new voice cut into the captain's headset. It wasn't air traffic control. It was deep calm and terrifyingly authoritative. "Captain Anderson, this is Darius Hayes. You are currently operating an aircraft tail number N772RA, correct?" Anderson blinked. "Who is this?" "You are on a restricted frequency. This is a federal offense." "I am the owner of Hayes Aero Leasing," the voice interrupted. "The company that owns the title to the aircraft you are sitting in. I am revoking the lease on this airframe, effective immediately due to a breach of contract regarding passenger safety and discrimination against a minor." "Shut down your engines, Captain. You aren't going to Zurich. You aren't going anywhere until I board that plane." Captain Anderson looked at his first officer, his face draining of color. He knew the name. Everyone in aviation knew the name. Darius Hayes didn't just have money. He had infrastructure. He supplied the parts, the leases, the logistics. If Hayes pulled the plug, the airline didn't fly. "Tower," Anderson said, his voice trembling. "Did you copy that?" "Copy Flight AA2, the tower replied. "Airport Operations has authorized a mobile staircase to your position. Do not move. Cooperation is advised. The airport authority is deferring to Mr. Hay." Hisola. Back in the cabin, the confusion was turning into panic. Passengers were standing up, looking out windows. "Why have we stopped?" Richard Sterling demanded, standing up and wiping his wet trousers. "Sheila, go tell the pilot I have a meeting at 900 a.m. in Zurich. Get this plane moving." Sheila looked out the window. She saw the mobile staircase truck, the kind usually used for remote stands, racing toward their plane, flanked by the black SUVs. I don't know what's happening, Mr. Sterling," Sheila stammered. The staircase truck locked into place at the forward L1 door, right next to first class. There was a heavy thud as the stairs connected. Then a sharp, authoritative knock on the outer hull. Captain Anderson opened the cockpit door, and looked at Sheila. "Open the door, Sheila." "Captain," she asked, bewildered. "We're on the taxiway. We can't—" "Open the damn door," Anderson yelled. "Now!" Sheila's hands shook as she disarmed the emergency slide and rotated the heavy handle of the main cabin door. The seal broke with a hiss of pressurization, and the door swung outward. The night air rushed in, smelling of kerosene and rain. Standing at the top of the stairs wasn't the police. It wasn't the TSA. It was a tall black man in a black cashmere overcoat. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His face was chiseled stone, his expression unreadable behind a pair of heavy-rimmed glasses. Behind him stood two men who were clearly private security, bulky, silent, and scanning the cabin with professional intensity. Darius Hayes stepped onto the plane. He didn't look at the captain. He didn't look at the passengers. He walked straight into the first-class cabin. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air recyclers. Richard Sterling, who had been blustering about suing the airline a moment ago, froze. He recognized the man. He had seen Darius Hayes on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had actually tried and failed to get a meeting with Hayes's investment firm last year. Mr. Hayes, Richard squeaked, his voice suddenly an octave higher. "This is quite a surprise. Are you joining us?" Darius didn't even acknowledge Richard's existence. He stopped in the middle of the first-class aisle and turned to Sheila. Sheila was trembling. She had been in the industry for 20 years. She knew how to handle drunks, nervous flyers, and entitled VIPs. She did not know how to handle a man who radiated this level of quiet, lethal power. "You," Darius said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of business class. "Are you the chief purser?" Yes, sir," Sheila whispered. "I'm Sheila." "Sheila," Darius repeated, testing the name like it was a bad taste in his mouth. "My daughter texted me. She said she was removed from her seat. Seat 1A. Darius's eyes shifted slowly to seat 1A, where Richard Sterling was standing, his pants stained with champagne, looking like a deer in headlights. "My daughter," Darius continued, stepping closer to Sheila, "was traveling quietly. She was tired. She had a valid ticket. And yet she is not in her seat." Sheila swallowed hard. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. We had a priority passenger, Mr. Sterling here, and we suspected fraud with the young lady's ticket. It's standard protocol to fraud." Darius raised an eyebrow. "You thought it was fraud because a black girl was sitting in first class wearing a hoodie?" No, not at all." Sheila waved her hands frantically. "It was just, she didn't fit the profile, and Mr. Sterling is a diamond member." "She didn't fit the profile," Darius repeated. He turned to Richard Sterling. "And this man does—" "The man who is currently wearing my daughter's seat assignment." Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain some dignity. "Now look here, Hayes. I didn't know who she was. I simply needed the seat for business. I'm a paying customer. I demand you unblock this plane so we can—" Darius turned on Richard so fast that Richard flinched. "You demand—" Darius laughed darkly. "Mr. Sterling, you are sitting in a seat paid for by my family trust. You are drinking champagne paid for by the airline that leases this plane from my company. You are currently trespassing on my property." Darius turned back to Sheila. "Where is she?" "Who?" Sheila squeaked. "Maya, my daughter, the girl you humiliated." Sheila pointed a shaking finger toward the back of the plane. "Row 44. Seat E, economy." Darius stared at her for 5 long seconds. The silence stretched until it was physically painful. "Row 44, Darius said softly. "The middle seat, by the toilets." I can move her back up," Sheila cried, grabbing a menu. "I can ask Mr. Sterling to move. We can fix this." "No," Darius said. "You won't fixing anything. I will." He turned to his head of security. "Locate Maya, bring her here, and get her bag." The security guard nodded and moved swiftly down the aisle past the gawking passengers in Business and Economy Plus. Darius stood there, waiting. He didn't speak. He just watched Sheila. Under his gaze, Sheila felt her career dissolving. She realized with a sinking horror that the system error she had invented was going to cost her everything. A minute later, Maya appeared from the back of the plane. She had her headphones around her neck, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She looked tired, but when she saw her father, her shoulders dropped in relief. "Dad," she said, "you didn't have to stop the whole plane." "I didn't stop the plane for the plane, Maya," Darius said, his voice softening instantly as he looked at her. "I stopped it for you. Did they hurt you?" "No," Maya said. She looked at Sheila, who was now crying silently. "She just made me feel small. She told everyone I was a fraud." Darius put an arm around his daughter's shoulder. He looked at the passengers in first class, then at Richard Sterling, and finally at Sheila. "Captain Anderson," Darius called out without looking at the cockpit. The captain stepped out, looking terrified. "Yes, Mr. Hayes." "This aircraft is grounded," Darius said calmly. "I am cancelling the lease agreement for this specific flight due to a violation of the non-discrimination clause in your contract. My lawyers are faxing the paperwork to your HQ right now. Everyone gets off." "Everyone?" Richard Sterling shouted. "Are you insane? I have to get to Zurich." Darius smiled a cold, shark-like smile. "Then I suggest you find an airline that values your business, Mr. Sterling, because this plane isn't moving." Darius guided Maya toward the open door, where the rain and the staircase waited. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Sheila. "You wanted to enforce the rules, Sheila Rule number 1 of customer service. Know your customer. You just failed the test." He turned to Maya. "Come on. The horizon is spooled up. We're going to Zurich, and we're taking the crew you actually like." They walked out onto the stairs, leaving behind a cabin that erupted into chaos. The silence that Darius Hayes left behind in the cabin of Flight 882 was short-lived. It was replaced almost instantly by a cacophony of outrage that threatened to blow the roof off the Boeing 707. "What do you mean the flight is cancelled?" A woman in business class shrieked, standing up. "I have a connection in Zurich to Milan." "This is kidnapping," a man in economy shouted. "You can't just hold us here." Captain Anderson emerged from the cockpit, his hat removed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked like a man who had just watched his pension fund evaporate. He picked up the interphone, his voice devoid of the earlier professional sheen. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to operational constraints beyond our control, this flight has been terminated. We will be towing back to the gate. Ground agents will meet you to discuss rebooking. Please bear with us." He slammed the phone back into its cradle and turned his gaze on Sheila. Sheila was standing in the galley, pressing a napkin to her forehead. She looked smaller now, the rigid helmet of blonde hair seeming to droop. "Captain, I was just following protocol. I thought the ticket was fraudulent. You know how strict the new revenue protection guidelines are." "Protocol." Anderson's voice was a low growl. "Sheila, you just kicked the daughter of our lessor off the plane. Do you have any idea what Hayes Aerosystems does? They supply our maintenance logs. They lease us 3 of our 710-7s. He didn't just cancel a flight. He effectively just grounded a chunk of the fleet. I didn't know, Sheila cried, her voice cracking. She looked like she was wearing a hoodie. She looked like a standby passenger. You judged a book by its cover, and you just burned down the library, Anderson spat. Get your bag. You're done for the night. Probably for good. In seat 1A, Richard Sterling was frantically tapping on his phone. The arrogance had drained out of him, replaced by the frantic energy of a rat trapped in a corner. Get me legal, he barked into his phone. I don't care what time it is, Darius Hayes just stranded me at JFK. I want to sue him for unlawful imprisonment. I want to sue the airline for breach of contract. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. His face went from red to a pasty white. What do you mean? Be careful. I'm the victim here. What, he's a limited partner in what fund? Ours? Richard lowered the phone slowly. He stared at the blank screen. It turned out that Darius Hayes's tentacles reached far deeper into the financial world than Richard had realized. Hayes wasn't just a logistics mogul. His family trust was a silent liquidity provider for half the hedge funds in Lower Manhattan, including Sterling's own firm, Sterling Capital. If Richard made a scene, if he sued Hayes, could pull his capital. Sterling Capital would be insolvent by Tuesday. Richard sank back into the seat that wasn't his. The smell of drying champagne rising from his trousers. He realized with a sickening lurch of his stomach that he had bullied the one teenager on Earth he couldn't afford to bully. Outside, the rain had intensified. The passengers of Flight 882 watched through the rain-streaked windows as the silver Gulfstream G700 taxied past them. It moved with elegant, effortless grace, its strobe lights cutting through the gloom. It didn't wait for a cue. It didn't wait for clearance. It simply owned the runway. Inside the Gulfstream, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the chaos on the commercial jet. The cabin was a sanctuary of silent luxury. The seats were upholstered in hand-stitched Italian leather. The air smelled of white tea and bergamot, and the lighting was a soft, warm amber. Maya was curled up on a divan, wrapped in a cashmere blanket her father had draped over her. Her old canvas bag was on the floor, but next to it was a fresh plate of sliced fruit and a glass of sparkling water. Darius sat opposite her in a club seat, his laptop open, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at her. You okay? He asked gently. Maya nodded. I'm fine, Dad. Really? You didn't have to go Bond villain on them, though, blocking the runway. That was dramatic. Darius chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. Sometimes, Maya, you have to remind people that the rules they use to crush others can also be used to crush them. That woman, Sheila. She used her small amount of power to make you feel small. I used my large amount of power to show her how big the world really is. He took a sip of espresso. Besides, I didn't lie. That plane had a safety violation. What violation? Maya asked. A crew member who lacks judgment is a safety hazard. Darius said, his eyes hardening slightly. If she can't tell the difference between a paying customer and a fraud because of a hoodie, she can't tell the difference between a security threat and a nervous flyer. She's a liability. The pilot's voice came over the hidden speakers. Mr. Hayes, we are climbing through 40,000 feet. Direct routing to Zurich. Flight time is 6 hours. Smooth air all the way. "Thank you, David," Darius said. Maya looked out the window at the receding lights of New York. She thought about Sheila. She thought about Richard Sterling. She felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. They had treated her like she was invisible, like she was debris to be swept aside. "Dad, yeah, what's going to happen to them?" Darius closed his laptop. "That's up to the airline. And the internet." "The internet," Darius tapped his phone. "You didn't see the passenger in 2F. The teenager with the phone, he was recording the whole time. It's already on TikTok." By the time the sun rose over the Atlantic, the video had 3 million views. It was shaky footage filmed vertically from across the aisle in first class, but the audio was crystal clear. "Don't play the race card with me." Sheila's voice rang out, tinny, but unmistakable. "Vacate this seat immediately, or I will have you removed by airport security." The camera then panned to Maya, calm, composed, holding her ground, and then to Richard Sterling, looking smug and dismissive. "Move. Some of us have business to do." The caption on the video posted by user @JetSetJake read, "Royal Atlantic purser kicks quiet teen out of paid first-class seat for a hedge fund guy. Then her billionaire dad pulls up on the runway. Instant karma. Flight 82. FAFO. Justice. The internet did what the internet does best. It became a vigilante mob. Hashtags began to trend on Twitter, X, boycott Royal Atlantic, fire. Sheila on seat 1A. In the Royal Atlantic corporate headquarters in London, the PR crisis room was in meltdown mode. Phones were ringing off the hook. Emails were flooding in from shareholders. The stock price had opened 4% lower and was dropping. The Vice President of Customer Experience was pacing the room, screaming at a speakerphone. "I don't care if she's a union rep. She humiliated a Hayes. Do you know who Darius Hayes is? He's the guy who decides if we get our engine parts next month. Fire her. Fire her. Now." Meanwhile, inside a cramped apartment in Queens, Sheila Graves was staring at her laptop screen, her eyes red and puffy from a sleepless night. She was reading the comments. "This flight attendant is vile. Look at that smirk. The way she spoke to that girl. Pure prejudice. I hope she loses everything." Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She usually didn't answer those, but she was expecting a call from her union rep. "Hello? Is this Sheila Graves?" A male voice, cold. "Yes. This is Daily Mail reporters. We're outside your building. We just want to ask." Sheila slammed the phone down. She went to the window and peeked through the blinds. There were 3 vans parked outside. Paparazzi. She sank to the floor, sobbing. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her. It wasn't just a bad day at work. It wasn't just a reprimand. She had become the face of corporate racism and entitlement. She was a meme, a villain, and Richard Sterling wasn't faring any better. In his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Richard was trying to eat breakfast, but his hands were shaking too much to hold his spoon. His face was plastered all over CNBC. "Hedge fund manager accused of bullying teen on flight." His email inbox was full of withdrawal requests from investors. His partners had called an emergency board meeting for 10:00 a.m. The agenda had one item: leadership transition. "It was just a seat," Richard whispered to the empty room. "It was just a goddamn seat." But it wasn't just a seat. It was the arrogance. It was the assumption that his comfort was worth more than someone else's dignity. And the world was no longer in the mood to let that slide. High above the drama in the stratosphere, the Gulfstream G700 began its descent into Zurich. Maya woke up to the smell of fresh croissants. She stretched, feeling the plush leather beneath her. The nightmare of the previous evening felt 1,000,000 miles away. "Morning," Darius said. He was reading a tablet, looking relaxed. "Did we break the internet?" Maya asked, rubbing her eyes. "We didn't," Darius said. "The truth did. Royal Atlantic just issued a press release. They are launching a full internal investigation. They've also offered to refund every passenger on Flight 882 and give them travel vouchers. And Sheila. Suspended without pay, pending termination." Maya looked down at her hands. "I feel kind of bad. She lost her job." "She didn't lose her job because of you, Maya," Darius said firmly. "She lost her job because she forgot her humanity. If she had treated you with basic respect, even if there was a ticket error, she'd be fine. But she chose cruelty. Choices have consequences." The pilot's voice chimed in. "Touchdown in 10 minutes. The weather in Zurich is clear, 15 degrees. Darius looked at his daughter. "Forget about them. You're here to start art school. You're here to create things. Don't let people like them live rent-free in your head. They are the past. You are the future." Maya smiled. She pulled her sketchbook out of her bag. She opened it to a blank page. She picked up a charcoal pencil. She didn't draw the plane. She didn't draw Sheila. She drew a pair of eyes, fierce, unyielding, and calm. Her own eyes. The wheels of the Gulfstream kissed the runway of Zurich Airport with a whisper, barely a bump. As they taxied to the private terminal, Maya saw the Swiss Alps in the distance, jagged and beautiful against the blue sky. She was ready. But back in New York, the storm wasn't over. In fact, for Sheila and Richard, the hard karma was just beginning to bite. The legal teams were circling, and Darius Hayes wasn't known for leaving loose ends. 2 days after the incident at JFK, the rain had stopped, but the floodwaters were rising for everyone who had underestimated Darius Hayes. In the glass-walled conference room of Royal Atlantic's New York hub, Sheila Graves sat alone on one side of a mahogany table. On the other side sat the regional director of in-flight services, a representative from HR, and the union steward, a man named Gary, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sheila had dressed conservatively, a navy blazer, no makeup hair pulled back. She looked nothing like the imperious tyrant of the first-class cabin. She looked like a woman trying to survive. "Ms. Graves." The HR representative began sliding a thick file across the table. "We have reviewed the incident report, the passenger testimonies, and the viral footage. It was taken out of context." Sheila interrupted, her voice trembling but defensive. "I was following the Revenue Protection Protocol. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Crew are authorized to challenge suspicious upgrade activity. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. I was protecting the airline's assets." The regional director, a woman named Miss Vance, who had started as a flight attendant in the 80s, took off her glasses. She looked at Sheila with a mixture of disappointment and icy resolve. "Sheila, let's stop pretending. We pulled the logs. The ticket was issued directly from the Centurion concierge desk. It was flagged as VIP in our system. The code VIP Hayes was right next to her name on the manifest." "Did you check the manifest?" Sheila looked down. I glanced at it. I must have missed the code." "You didn't miss it," Ms. Vance said softly. "You ignored it. You saw a young black girl in a hoodie and decided she was a target. You wanted to give the seat to Mr. Sterling because you thought he would tip you. We have the statement from the flight attendant in the aft galley. You told her, quote, I'm going to bump the kid for the hedge fund guy. He's good for $100. The room went dead silent. The union steward sighed and closed his notebook. Sheila, the steward said, I can't grieve this. It's gross misconduct. It's a violation of the airline's non-discrimination policy, and it caused a material loss to the company. Material loss? Sheila scoffed nervously. It was one flight cancellation. Ms. Vance leaned forward. This morning, Hayes Aerosystems informed us they are reviewing the lease renewal for our entire 777 fleet. That's 12 aircraft, Sheila. If they pull those leases, we lose 20% of our long-haul capacity. That's hundreds of millions of dollars. Because you wanted a tip. She slid a piece of paper across the table. You are terminated effective immediately. You will lose your pension contributions for the last 3 years due to the gross misconduct clause. Your flight benefits are permanently revoked. Please hand over your ID badge and airport security credentials. Sheila stared at the paper. The words blurred. 20 years of flying, the layovers in Paris, the prestige, the authority. Gone. But what am I supposed to do? Sheila whispered. I have a mortgage. You should have thought about that before you tried to play God in the galley, Ms. Vance said, standing up. Security will escort you out, across town, in the sleek minimalist offices of Sterling Capital on 57th Street. The air conditioning was set to a frigid 68 degrees, but Richard Sterling was sweating. He sat at the head of the boardroom table, but for the first time in 10 years, nobody was looking at him with respect. The board of partners. 5 men and women who controlled the firm's equity were staring at him like he was a radioactive isotope. It's a PR blip, Richard said, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. It'll blow over in a week. I'll issue an apology. I'll donate to a charity. The NAACP or something. We can spin this. It's not a PR blip, Richard, said Evelyn Choi, the senior managing partner. She tapped the screen of her iPad. Have you checked the liquidity reports this morning? I haven't had time, Richard snapped. Then let me update you, Evelyn said calmly. At 9:00 a.m., the Hayes Family Trust initiated a full redemption of their capital from our Global Alpha Fund. That's $400 million. Following them, 3 pension funds that use Hayes's risk analysis software also pulled out. That's another $600 million. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. They can't do that. There are lock-up periods. There's a key man clause, Evelyn replied, and a reputational harm clause in the limited partnership agreement. You violated both. By becoming a viral pariah, you triggered the escape hatch for our biggest investors. She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city Richard used to think he owned. We are bleeding $1 billion a day because of your ego, Richard. We have to stop the bleeding. How? Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. We are invoking the forced buyout clause, Evelyn said, turning back to him. You are out, effective immediately. We are buying your shares at book value, which, thanks to the mass withdrawals you caused, is currently at a 5-year low. You can't do this, Richard slammed his fist on the table. I built this firm, and you destroyed it in 5 minutes on a tarmac at JFK. Evelyn said, cold. Security has already boxed up your personal effects. You have 10 minutes to clear the building. If you refuse, we will call the NYPD. And I think we both know the press is waiting downstairs. Do you really want to be walked out in handcuffs on camera? Richard Sterling slumped back in his chair. He looked at his bespoke suit, his Patek Philippe watch. They suddenly felt like costumes. He realized with a terrifying clarity that without his money, without his title, he was just a rude, middle-aged man who nobody liked. The hard karma wasn't that he lost his money. It was that he lost his shield. He was now exposed to the world just as vulnerable as he had tried to make Maya feel. 5 years later. The gallery in Zurich's Im Viaduct district was packed. It was opening night for the season's most anticipated exhibition, Turbulence and Grace. The artist, now 22, was the talk of the European art scene. Her work was visceral, raw, and deeply emotional. It focused on themes of power displacement and the quiet dignity of being unseen. Maya Hayes stood in the center of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. She wore a simple black dress, her hair in natural curls, her smile warm and genuine. She wasn't hiding in a hoodie anymore. She was radiant. Darius Hayes stood in the corner watching her. He had aged a bit, a little more grey in his beard, but his eyes were just as sharp. He wasn't the center of attention tonight. He was just a proud dad. A journalist from Art Forum approached Maya. "Ms. Hayes, your centerpiece, the charcoal sketch titled Seat 1A, is incredibly powerful. The contrast between the small figure and the looming shadows. What inspired it?" Maya looked at the large canvas. It depicted a young girl sitting alone in a large seat, surrounded by distorted, screaming faces, but looking out a window at a calm, silver bird in the sky. "It was a moment where I learned who I was," Maya said thoughtfully. "I learned that dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you keep no matter what they try to take away." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes. "And the title, is it metaphorical? Literal?" Maya smiled. "But it's also about the idea that everyone deserves a seat at the table. Or the window." Thousands of miles away at a bus terminal in New Jersey, the fluorescent lights buzzed with an annoying hum. Sheila Graves adjusted her uniform, a polyester vest that was 2 sizes too tight and smelled of stale coffee. She was working the ticket counter for a budget bus line that ran from New York to Atlantic City. "Next," she called out, her voice raspier than it used to be. A young couple stepped up. They were arguing about their luggage. The man slammed a heavy bag onto the scale. "It's 5 pounds over," Sheila said, pointing to the digital readout. "That's a $20 fee." "Oh, come on, lady," the man groaned. "It's just 5 pounds. Give us a break." Sheila looked at him. She felt that old urge to snap, to assert her authority, to tell him who she was. But then she remembered the apartment she had lost. She remembered the humiliating months of unemployment. She remembered the job interviews where people Googled her name and then politely ended the meeting. She swallowed her pride. "It's policy," she said, her voice flat. "I can't override it." "Whatever," the man grumbled, throwing a $20 bill at her. Sheila took the money. She printed the ticket. As she handed it over, she glanced at the TV screen mounted on the wall of the waiting area. It was showing an entertainment news segment. Rising star Maya Hayes sells out Zurich show. Her collection explores themes of resilience. The camera zoomed in on Maya's face. She looked happy, unburdened. Sheila looked down at her own hands, stained with toner ink from the cheap ticket printer. She realized then that karma wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a slow, grinding erosion. It was the daily reminder that she had held diamonds in her hand and thrown them away for rocks. "Next," Sheila whispered. And what of Richard Sterling? He didn't end up on the street. Men like him rarely do. But he was diminished. He was now a consultant, working out of a shared WeWork office in Jersey City, trying to pitch high-risk crypto schemes to lower-tier investors who didn't know his history. He was flying commercial these days, economy. On a flight to a conference in Des Moines, he found himself squeezed into a middle seat. Row 32B. To his left was a young teenager wearing headphones and a hoodie. The flight attendant came by with the drink cart. "Sir, would you like a drink?" Richard looked at the lukewarm can of soda. "Do you have champagne?" The flight attendant laughed. "Not back here, honey. Coke or Sprite." Richard sighed. He looked at the teenager next to him. The kid was drawing in a sketchbook. "Nice drawing," Richard muttered, trying to be polite, trying to be a different man. The kid looked up, took off his headphones and smiled. "Thanks." Richard looked out the window. The wing of the plane bobbed in the turbulence. He closed his eyes and finally, after 5 years, accepted his seat. The story of Flight 882 was over. The runway was clear. And that is how the runway was cleared, not just of a plane, but of the arrogance that blocked it. Maya's story reminds us of a brutal truth. Titles, first-class tickets, and expensive suits are just costumes. Real power is character. Real power is how you treat the person who can do absolutely nothing for you. Sheila and Richard learned the hard way that when you try to make someone feel small, you only reveal how small you truly are. The next time you see someone in a hoodie or a service worker or someone out of place, remember you never know who they are. You never know who is coming to pick them up. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served cold, please hit that like button. It helps get this story to more people. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to be kind. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a flight with us. Thanks for watching and stay humble.